The paradox. Hold on a second. Seriously, stop and think about this. Every country in the world is in debt. Yes, every country. The United States currently owes over $38 trillion, the highest in its history. Japan owes $9 trillion. The European Union carries about $14 trillion. The UK, France, Italy, all of them. Now you might say, okay, but oil-rich countries must be debt-free. Nope. Even Saudi Arabia is in debt. Well, what about export powerhouses? China is in debt. Germany is in debt. Wait a minute. If every country on the planet is in debt, who exactly did they borrow this money from? Aliens? A parallel universe? The future? This is the beginning of an incredibly bizarre rabbit hole. I'm a financial historian, and I've spent the last 15 years trying to decode this system. I can tell you, this story is way stranger than you think, because here's the mind-blowing truth you'll have to face. The world does not actually owe anyone. It owes itself. What do you mean it owes itself? You'll ask. Exactly that. The world has written IOUs to itself. It signed debt contracts with itself. But be careful. This doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. Far from it. This might be one of the largest wealth transfer mechanisms in history. There's $315 trillion in total debt on the planet. Let me say that again. $315 trillion. That's nearly 3 times the size of the global economy. The world owes 3 times what it produces in a year. Does that make sense? No? Is it possible? Apparently, yes. Is it sustainable? Ah, well, that's what we're going to talk about. The birth of debt. The world before 1694. Let's start at the beginning. Way back, because debt is actually as old as humanity. There are debt records in ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerians wrote debt records on clay tablets. But debt back then was very different from today. Think of it this way. In ancient times, if you were a farmer and couldn't harvest due to drought, you'd borrow wheat from your neighbor. Next year, you'd return 2 wheat as payment. Simple. Concrete. Understandable. When kings raised money for war, what did they do? They collected taxes. Or they plundered. Or they accumulated stockpiles of gold and silver. Royal treasuries were filled with real, physical values. That's how it was until the 17th century. The value of money came from the gold and silver in it. Debt was a real thing, concrete, tangible, repayable. But then everything changed. 1694, the DNA of modern debt. The year 1694. England is in the middle of a war with France that will last 9 years. King William III's coffers are empty. The gold's gone, the silver's depleted, but the war continues and the army needs money. Soldiers are dying of starvation. Ships are sinking from neglect. What can the king do? The traditional method, more taxes. But the people are already on the verge of rebellion. If he squeezes them more, he might lose his own crown. Right at this moment, history's most brilliant or most dangerous idea emerges. The king goes to the wealthy London merchants and makes this proposal. Give me £1.2 million. I'll pay you 8% interest annually. Forever. Wait, forever? Yes, I won't pay back the principal, says the king, but I'll pay the interest every year, and I guarantee these interest payments with future taxes. The merchants think, 8% interest. And as long as the kingdom doesn't collapse, this money will keep coming forever. Interesting. But here's the truly brilliant part. These debt notes, these bonds, can be bought and sold. So if I lend to the king and later need cash, I can sell this note to someone else. Right here in 1694, the DNA of the modern financial system is formed. To manage this arrangement, collect the money and pay the interest, the Bank of England is founded, one of the world's first true central banks. And it explodes. The state can now spend money it doesn't have. It's selling future tax revenues today. Hacking time, essentially. In return, the lenders gain tremendous power. They're no longer just merchants. They're the kingdom's financiers, partners, in a way equal to the monarch. They hold a promise from the government that can be traded. This is the birth of the government bond. The idea spreads. France sees this and copies it. The Netherlands develops it, rationalizes it. In 1776, the young American colonies start a war of independence against Britain. But how will they finance the war? They have no army, no treasury, no gold. The answer? Debt. Alexander Hamilton, America's first Treasury Secretary, copies the British model. The Continental Congress issues bonds. The French, the Dutch, even some wealthy Americans buy these bonds. And the miracle happens. America wins the war. But Hamilton goes much further. He says, debt is not a burden, it's a tool. A nation with debt is a credible nation, because a nation without debt has no credit. This is a radical idea. Until then, debt was shameful, a sign of failure. Hamilton turns it into a display of power. Borrowing capacity and governing capacity. Empires once conquered territory to extract gold. Now they issue bonds to extract interest. The battlefield becomes the balance sheet. The 20th century, debt's golden age. Fast forward. Throughout the 20th century, 2 world wars, the Cold War, dozens of smaller conflicts, all financed by debt. Think about World War I. Britain, France, Germany. They all exhausted their gold reserves in the first year of the war. So how did they continue for 4 more years? Debt. Massive astronomical amounts of debt. After the war, Germany was saddled with war reparations. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany owed 132 billion gold marks, roughly $500 billion in today's money. How would Germany pay this? By borrowing. They borrowed from other countries to pay the reparations. Then they borrowed more to pay back those loans. This cycle continues throughout the 1920s until the stock market crashes in 1929. The Great Depression erupts, banks fail, unemployment hits 25%, the economy collapses. The solution? More debt. Franklin D. Roosevelt launches the New Deal. Billions of dollars in public spending. Where does the money come from? Debt. World War II begins. In 1940, America owes $40 billion. By 1945, it's $260 billion, a 6-fold increase in 5 years. But something miraculous happens. After the war, the economy explodes. The debt melts away with economic growth. America becomes a global superpower. The lesson: debt isn't bad. When used correctly, it's a growth engine. Bretton Woods and magic money. 1944, even before World War II ends, representatives from 44 countries gather in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The agenda: establish the post-war global economic system, and they reach an incredible agreement. The dollar will be pegged to gold. Every $35 will equal 1 ounce of gold. All other currencies will be pegged to the dollar. America becomes the world's central bank. The dollar becomes the world's reserve currency. This gives America incredible power. They can print dollars for the world, and the world sees these dollars as safe as gold. But there's a problem. How many dollars can America print? In theory, only as much as the gold they have. But in practice, they're printing way more. In the 1960s, French President Charles de Gaulle notices this. He says, "Wait, America doesn't have this much gold. Exchange our dollars for gold." France sends shiploads of dollars to America, demanding gold. America panics. The gold stock is melting. If everyone starts doing this, the system collapses. 1971, President Richard Nixon goes on television and makes a historic announcement. The dollar will no longer be convertible to gold. The Bretton Woods system dies, and something incredible happens. Nothing happens. I mean, the economy doesn't collapse or anything. The dollar is still valuable. Everyone still wants dollars. Why? Because people now trust the system, not the paper. The American economy, the American military, American law. Money is no longer a metal, it's a belief system. And this opens the doors wide. Because if you're not tied to gold, you can theoretically print money forever. The 21st century, debt explosion. Now let's get to the present day. America has $38 trillion in debt. So who does it owe this money to? What's your first reaction? China, you think? The media constantly says this. China is buying America's debt. America is becoming dependent on China. Is this true? Partially. China holds about $800 billion of America's debt. Sounds like a lot? But what portion is that of the total $38 trillion? Roughly 2%. So where's the rest? You ask? Here's where it gets really interesting. About half of the $38 trillion is publicly held, meaning owed to investors. The other half is owed to different parts of the government itself. For example, the Social Security Fund buys treasury bonds, so the American government owes itself. Now let's look at that publicly held half, about $19 trillion. Roughly 2/3 of that, about $13 trillion, is in American banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining 1/3, about $6 trillion, is in foreign hands. The biggest share is in Japan, $1 trillion. Then China, $800 billion. Then the UK, Luxembourg, Belgium. So most of America's debt is to itself. How does this work? The system works like this. The US Treasury issues bonds. Give us $1,000, get $1,100 in 10 years, it says. Banks and funds buy these bonds. The Federal Reserve also buys these bonds, but with money, it prints itself, creating new money. Americans pay taxes. These taxes pay the interest on the bonds. These interest payments flow back to American retirement accounts, banks, funds. A giant loop, a giant mirror system. The debt is real, but the creditor is actually a reflection of the system itself. The global debt web. And this isn't just in America, it's a planet-wide web. Japan lends to America by buying US Treasury bonds. America lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing countries through the World Bank. Developing countries lend back by parking foreign exchange reserves in Western bonds. A planet-wide game of hot potato. But the potato is made of promises. Everyone holds everyone else's IOUs. Every promise is secured by another promise. Like we're sitting at a giant poker table. Everyone borrowed chips from the person next to them. And the only rule keeping the game alive, nobody gets up. Because if one person leaves, the chain breaks. Let me give you an example. 2015, Greece had a crisis. Actually, the crisis started in 2010 but peaked in 2015. The Greek government became unable to pay its debts. It was about to exit the Eurozone. Banks closed. People could only withdraw 60 euros per day from ATMs. What did Europe do in panic? They rescued Greece. But how? By lending more money. The European Central Bank and IMF gave Greece billions of euros in loans. What did Greece use this money for? To pay off all debts. But in return, Greece was required to implement austerity policies. Public spending was cut. Taxes were raised. Retirement pensions were reduced. Unemployment hit 27%. Especially among young people, unemployment exceeded 50%. An entire generation sacrificed. The word bailout package became synonymous with social suicide. But the system was saved. The euro didn't collapse. Banks didn't fail. Because the real issue wasn't Greece. The real issue was confidence. If Greece fails, who's next? Italy? Spain? Portugal? If the dominoes start falling, where does it stop? That's why the system rescued Greece. Not for the Greeks' sake, but for the system's integrity. Who really has the power? So, you say, is all this debt sustainable? Doesn't it have to be repaid someday? This is where things get really interesting. According to modern economic theory, no, national debt doesn't have to be repaid. What? You say? How's that possible? Look, if you or I take out a credit card loan, we have to pay it back someday. We have to pay the principal. Otherwise, our credit score gets ruined. We get taken to court. Our assets get seized. But governments work differently. Governments refinance their debt. They take out new debt to pay old debt. Forever? This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is official policy. Think about it. America hasn't zeroed out its debt since 1835. It's been in debt for 190 years, and nobody cares. Japan's debt exceeds 250% of its GDP, meaning Japan owes 2.5 times what it produces in a year. Mathematically absurd, but the system works. Why? Because bond yields are still low. Investors still see Japanese bonds as safe. Investors aren't waiting to be repaid. They're waiting to renew the deal. They're waiting for the continuous flow of interest. Because for them, government debt is the safest collateral, especially in giant economies like America. A US Treasury bond for investors isn't a liability. It's an asset. The world's safest asset. Banks hold it. Pension funds base their portfolios on it. Central banks treat it like money. The system depends on governments never paying off their debt, because if they did, the world would lose its most trusted financial instrument. Magic money printing. Now you might be thinking, Ashurman, why doesn't America just print its own money and pay off its debt? Great question. The answer is even more interesting. Actually, it does. But very carefully. Here's how it works. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, buys bonds from the market. But how does it do this? By going to its computer and adding zeros to an account. Literally, I'm not joking. If you look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, in 2008, it had $900 billion in assets. By 2020, $7 trillion. By 2022, $9 trillion. Where did this money come from? Nowhere. It was created digitally. It's called money printing, but nothing is actually printed. Numbers are just added to an account. But doesn't this cause inflation, you ask? Here's where the real magic happens. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Between 2008 and 2020, the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars. Everyone feared inflation would explode, but it didn't. Why? Because this money didn't flow into the real economy. It circulated in financial markets. It inflated stock prices, raised bond prices, but didn't much affect bread prices. But in 2021-2022, things changed. During the pandemic, governments gave money directly to people. That's when inflation exploded, because this money went into the real economy. Supermarkets, restaurants, cars. The hidden power of markets. But here's the scariest part. The real power isn't even in governments. It's in the markets. Hedge funds, pension funds, asset management companies, sovereign wealth funds. Institutions managing tens of trillions in assets. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, manages over $10 trillion in assets, more than 10 times Turkey's GDP. Vanguard, State Street, Fidelity, all managing trillions. These institutions decide which government bonds to buy, which countries are credible, which are risky. What happens when they lose confidence? Currencies collapse, governments fall, economies are restructured overnight. Examples? I'll give you some. 1992, the British pound crisis. A hedge fund manager named George Soros bets billions of dollars against the pound. The Bank of England tries to defend the pound, spends billions of dollars, but it's not enough. Soros wins. The pound loses 15% of its value. In one day, 1997, the Asian crisis. Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea. Their economies collapse. Why? Currencies were overvalued. Foreign investors lost confidence, withdrew their money. They fell like dominoes. 2001, Argentina. $100 billion debt default. The largest sovereign default to that point. The peso collapsed, banks failed, people couldn't access their savings. 2008, the global financial crisis. When Lehman Brothers fails, the entire system freezes. Banks don't trust each other. Credit markets freeze. Only government intervention keeps the system afloat. Democracy decides who governs, but markets decide who survives. Central banks, modern high priests. So what exactly do central banks do? They don't just manage debt, they actively produce it. Every time the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys a government bond, it creates new money in exchange. One balance sheet item becomes another balance sheet's asset. So in practice, the Fed buys a bond, adds digital money to the seller's account. This money is created from nothing. Every dollar in circulation represents a unit of debt somewhere. There's no such thing as debt-free money. Every banknote, every digital dollar has an invisible IOU engraved on it. That $100 bill in your wallet? It's actually a debt note from the Federal Reserve to you. It says, this piece of paper represents a small share of the US economy. But why do you trust this share? Because others trust it too. Because the government accepts it as taxes. Because the system works. Until it doesn't. When the system collapses. But what if confidence is shaken, you ask? What if the system collapses? It has happened. Many times. We saw Greece. We saw Argentina. But there are more recent, more striking examples. 2022, Sri Lanka. A tourist paradise island nation. Beautiful beaches, rich culture. But its government overborrowed, Foreign exchange reserves were depleted. The result? No fuel, no electricity, no medicine, insufficient food. People wait in kilometer-long lines for gasoline. Hospitals cancel surgeries. The government building is stormed. The president flees the country. All why? Because it couldn't service its debt. When foreign currency ran out, loans couldn't be obtained, imports stopped, the economy collapsed. 2023, Lebanon, once the Paris of the Middle East. Now, there are entry bans to banks. People can't access their own account money. The currency lost 95% of its value. A daily wage teacher can't even buy a week's worth of food with their salary anymore. When the system collapses, the creditors suddenly become visible. The IMF, rating agencies, anonymous bondholders. And when the bailout package comes, the price is always the same. Austerity, privatization, social pain. But here's the interesting part. Even after collapse, the system restarts. New loans replace old ones. Old debts are restructured. The machine resets with a new name on the same balance sheet. Debt isn't meant to be repaid because in the 21st century, debt isn't designed to be repaid. It's designed to be continuously rolled over. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's official, open policy. Ask yourself, when was the last time America had a budget surplus? 2001, exactly 23 years ago. And even that only lasted 3 or 4 years. Japan, deficits for decades. Europe, same thing. Governments work to keep debt sustainable, not to pay it off. Why? Because if you paid off your debt, the economy would collapse. Think about it this way. If Washington woke up one day and said, okay, we're paying off the $38 trillion, what would it have to do? Raise taxes to astronomical levels, cut all public spending, dedicate every penny to debt repayment for decades. The result? Economic collapse. The dollar supply would shrink dramatically. Because most dollars were actually created through debt. Banks and funds would lose their most stable asset. Retirement accounts would collapse. Global trade would stop. Paying off the debt would destroy what makes the economy function. So governments never pay it off. They continuously roll it over. Debt becomes a kind of heartbeat, each time pumping new blood into the system. Interest, the real product. So what's really being sold in this system? Interest. Governments issue bonds. Investors buy them. Governments pay interest. Where does this interest go? To bondholders, meaning banks, funds, wealthy individuals, foreign governments. Where does this money come from? Taxes. So practically, the average citizen pays taxes. These taxes cover bond interest. Interest flows to the wealthy, banks, funds, a wealth transfer mechanism. Turkey has a very similar situation. The Turkish state issues bonds at high interest rates. Banks buy them. The state pays high interest. This money comes from taxpayers. Result? A transfer of money from poor to rich in society. This system is not just between countries, but also between classes. And that's why global inequality and global debt are rising hand in hand. Over the last 30 years, global debt has tripled. In the same period, the wealth of the world's richest 1% has also tripled. Coincidence? No. Buying the future. Let's add this too. Debt is actually buying the future, using tomorrow's resources to spend today. For example, America spends $1 trillion annually just on interest. More than the education budget, the health budget, infrastructure. What is this money doing? Paying the bill for old debts. Not investing, not creating new value, just paying the past's bill. And future generations? They're born into debt before they're even born. When an American baby is born in 2024, they automatically have about $100,000 in national debt share. Before walking, before talking. In debt? Are there alternatives? So you say, can this system be changed? Aren't there alternatives? Theoretically, yes. Practically, it's complicated. Some say Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies will end this system. A currency outside central banks' control, with limited supply that governments can't manipulate. Nice idea. In reality, as of 2024, the total crypto market value is around $2.3 trillion. Global debt is $315 trillion, so less than 1%. Moreover, crypto is also based on debt. People take out loans to buy crypto. Exchanges create derivative products on crypto. the system copies itself again. Some say, let's return to the gold standard. Tie money back to gold. Problem: there's not enough gold in the world. All the world's gold is worth about $15 trillion. But global M2 money supply, cash plus deposits, is over $100 trillion. The math doesn't work. Some also say, forgive the debt, reset it. The Jubilee system? Every 50 years, all debts are wiped out. They did this in ancient Mesopotamia. Kings occasionally forgave all debts to reduce social tension. But in the modern world, who will forgive the debts? And to whom? If all debts are erased, all assets disappear too. Because one person's debt is another person's asset? Who's the real creditor? Now let's return to the opening question. If everyone's in debt, who's the creditor? The answer? Us, all of us. Do you have a retirement account? It probably contains government bonds. Are you a bank customer? Your bank holds government bonds. Do you pay taxes? Part of your taxes pays bond interest. You're both debtor and creditor, both victim and beneficiary. That's why the system is so resilient. Nobody's really outside. We're all inside. Creditors aren't the bad guys. Debtors aren't the victims. We're all parts of the same engine. The problem is what happens when the engine breaks down, when the fuel runs out, when confidence is shaken. Trust, the foundation of the system. Because ultimately, everything relies on trust. This system stands on belief, not mathematics. Investors believe America will pay interest, even though it will never pay the principal. And as long as this belief exists, the machine keeps turning. But trust is fragile. In 2008, the system nearly collapsed. When Lehman Brothers failed, banks didn't trust each other. Trust in the system evaporated overnight. The system was only saved by governments printing trillions of dollars. So what will happen in the next crisis? Will they print even more money? Will inflation explode? Or will it be different this time? Conclusion: can it last forever? That's the real question. Can this system continue forever? Mathematically, no. Continuously growing debt cannot be sustained forever. But historically, so far it has. The system experiences crises, adapts, continues. This system has been working since 1694, 330 years. It's seen dozens of wars, crises, collapses. But it's still standing. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe instead of asking, when will it collapse, we should ask, how will it evolve? Maybe in the future there will be central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Maybe blockchain technology will be integrated. Maybe a different system will be built instead of national debt. Or maybe the system will continue as is, because nobody wants the alternative. The system is broken, but it's a familiar broken. Change is more frightening. What does this mean for us? So what does all this mean for us? First, understand this. You're not going to change the system. It's too big, too complex, too entrenched, but you can understand it. And once you understand, at least you can make informed decisions. You understand that debt isn't bad, that when used correctly, it's a force multiplier. You understand the real cost of interest, why credit card debt is so dangerous. You understand how the system works. During crises, instead of panicking, you think strategically, and most importantly, you know the answer to who does the world owe money to. Ourselves, all of us. The system, debt isn't a burden. It's the architecture of the modern world. Every war, every crisis, every rise and fall sits on this invisible scaffolding. And if you follow the chain of creditors long enough, you discover something disturbing. The world doesn't owe anyone in particular. It owes itself. But that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. The line between debtor and creditor has blurred beyond recognition. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if this balance is disrupted, if trust is shaken, the illusion ends, and we remember what debt really is. A promise that can't be kept forever.